بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولا شبيه ولا مثيل له ولا ضد ولا ند ولا جسد ولا صورة ولا أعضاء له. كان الله ولا مكان فهو الآن على ما عليه كان. فلا تضربوا لله الأمثال ولله المثل الأعلى. تنزه ربي عن الجلوس والقعود وعن الحركة والسكون وعن الاتصال والانفصال. لا يحل فيه شيء ولا ينحل منه شيء ولا يحل هو في شيء لأنه ليس كمثله شيء مهما تصورت ببالك فالله لا يشبه ذلك. ومن وصف الله بمعنى من معاني البشر فقد كفر. وأشهد أن سيدنا وعظيمنا وقائدنا وقرة أعيننا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله ونبيه وصفيه وحبيبه وخليله أرسله الله هدى ورحمة للعالمين هاديا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه سراجا وهاجا وقمرا منيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وأعظم وأنعم وأكرم على هذا النبي الكريم كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا حبيب الله. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا عظيم الجاه. I praise Allah, I glorify Him and I thank Him for all the blessings that He gives without Him being obligated to give anything. And I ask Allah Ta'ala to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and to protect His Muslim nation. I testify that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one without a partner, the one without an equal, the one without a similar, the one who is unlike anything in the universe and nothing in the universe is like Him. He has no father, no mother, no sister, no brother, no son, and no daughter. He exists without time and place because He is the creator of time and place. He does not reside above the throne like the Christians say, and He is not attributed with fatigue like the Jews say. Our Lord is glorified beyond any imperfection that the non-Muslims attribute to Him. Whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah Ta'ala does not resemble that. And whoever attributes an attribute of the creation to Allah is not a Muslim. And I testify that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, the son of Abdul Manaf, from the tribe of Quraysh, is the best creation of Allah and His final prophet and messenger, sent to all humans and jinn, and He is truthful about everything that He conveyed of the revelation. Thereafter, we remind ourselves to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah in attending this session of Islamic knowledge, because having the sincere intention is a requirement to get the reward. So the Muslim, whenever he does a good deed, he has to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah to get reward for that good deed. The reward is defined as the compensation that the Muslim receives in the hereafter for the good deeds that he did in this life among what makes him happy. An example of the reward that is guaranteed to the righteous Muslim in the grave is that his grave is expanded approximately 105 feet by 105 feet, and his grave is illuminated with a light similar to the light of the full moon, and the fragrance of paradise will be present in the grave. The sincere intention means for the Muslim to do the good deeds, seeking the acceptance of Allah only, and not the praise of the people. So inshallah, we'll continue reading from the book, the Lucid Word. For those of you that yet don't have a copy yet, I advise you to get one. And if you need one, you can DM me and we can arrange that, inshallah. We got to page 57, at the bottom of page 57, where it says section 4. So the author said, section 4, performing the obligations and avoiding the prohibitions. You should know that every accountable person is obligated to perform all of what Allah made obligatory on them, such as prayer, fasting, zakah, returning what they have taken from people unjustly, etc. One must also perform that in the manner which Allah ordered, by fulfilling the integrals and the conditions of these obligatory matters. Subhanallah. This is something that is a basic and a core teaching of Islam, which is that every accountable person is obligated to fulfill all the obligations and to refrain from all the sins. What does that mean? Who is the accountable person? The accountable person is the person who is sane, pubescent, and received the basic message of Islam. So if a person is born to two Muslim parents and they are sane, then the thing that makes them accountable is when they become pubescent. And by becoming pubescent, it's either by reaching 15 lunar years of age, or by menstruation, or by seeing, or by emitting their sexual reproductive fluid. This is how someone becomes pubescent. So the accountable people, for example, like us, we're obligated to do all the obligations and to refrain from all the sins, without exception. So the fact that some people it's almost normal to them that they do sins in the open, this is something that obviously, apparently, on the apparent meaning, what we see with our own eyes, what we witness, that this is not good. Now, there's a difference between knowing how to deal with a person, or knowing how to treat a person, or knowing how to approach a person that's openly sinning, and the fact that they are wrong for sinning in the first place. Now, in Islam, we judge people according to what they show us. We don't judge assuming or trying to guess or thinking of, for example, what's in their heart or things like that. We don't do that. We only judge a person by what they show us. So if a person, for example, they don't speak any ill words in front of us and apparently they're not doing anything sinful, then we judge them as such. And if the person openly, for example, shows us that they commit sins, for example, they drink alcohol in front of us, or they do drugs in front of us, or whatever, they miss the prayer in front of us, then we judge them according to that. We know that they are a person that commits sins. What a person does in their own private life behind closed doors, we don't have any, that doesn't concern us, meaning that we don't go and spy on people, we don't go and search for people's defects. If a person, let's say, out on the street, they don't apparently commit any sin, then we judge them as such, and we don't think, or for example, we don't assume that behind closed doors that they do sinful things, etc. We judge a person according to what they show us. So every accountable person is obligated to perform everything that Allah Ta'ala made an obligation upon us, such as prayer, fasting, zakah, returning what they have taken from people unjustly. So if someone takes the property of somebody else unjustly, and they're obligated to return it. It's not like you turn a blind eye and you pretend like that's not the case. No, the case is that this person has done injustice and they have to rectify it. Now, when we said about the difference between knowing or how to judge a person and how to approach them, these are two different things, because one of them is related to if you want this person to benefit, you want this person to take the advice. What's the best approach to do that? So you have to assess the situation, look at the person, look at if they are someone that, for example, the way that they perceive you is someone that you will listen to, for example. But under no circumstance do we pretend or act like it's all good. Meaning, under no circumstance do we pretend and act like that it's okay for this person to do that. There's a difference between knowing that you're doing wrong and, for example, advising someone to stop doing wrong. So if somebody's doing wrong, and wrong is wrong. If they ask us, for example, do you think this is wrong? You say, yes, this is wrong. Not just because you have some sort of emotional attachment to them, you say, no, it's not wrong, or you say it's okay. No, you speak the truth in all circumstances. So if a person were to ask you, for example, they were to say, is this wrong? Am I doing wrong? And they in fact are doing wrong, then you advise them accordingly. But you never sugarcoat, you never lie to supposedly save a person's feelings. And again, one must also perform those obligations in the manner which Allah ordered, by fulfilling the integrals and the conditions of these obligatory matters. So, for example, we're obligated to pray 5 times a day. If a person is going to pray 5 times a day, then not only do they have to, for example, and they have to do that, but they have to do it correctly. So it's not just any which way that the person does it and they would be considered that they pray 5 times a day. No, they have to fulfill it within the parameters that religiously, that the Prophet ﷺ, that was revealed to him and that he conveyed. Because that's what it means to fulfill what Allah commanded, to fulfill what Allah ordered, to obey what Allah ordered. Then you have to do it in the way that was prescribed in the religion. It's not that each one of us, for example, chooses to do it however he wants, and then that this is what counts supposedly. And this is not something that we made up. It's not something that, it's not a rule that we came up with. This is what Allah Ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. An integral, reading on, bottom of page 57. An integral is part of an act of worship that must be fulfilled and without which the act is not valid, and a condition is a requirement that is not part of the worship, but without which the act of worship is not valid. So in this specific terminology or jargon, when we say integral, it's referring to the Arabic word rukun or fard. And when we say condition, it's referring to, in terminology, the Arabic word shart. So what does this mean? This means that there are certain things within the act of worship that they are components of the act of worship. So again, taking the prayer as an example. When we pray, we recite Al-Fatiha within the prayer. Reciting Al-Fatiha is a component of the prayer, without which, if we left it out, then the prayer would be invalid. So someone, for example, they didn't recite Al-Fatiha in the prayer, then their prayer would not be valid. And the Fatiha is an actual piece of the prayer. It's an actual component of the prayer. This is what is called, or what is known as, in the terminology of the scholars of Islamic law, as a rukun or an integral. And a condition is something that is not an actual component of the act itself, but if the person left it out, that act itself would be invalid. So again, with the prayer, what's a condition of the prayer? Is the wudu. Wudu is not an actual component of the prayer. It's not within the act of the prayer. However, without the wudu, the prayer would be invalid. So this is what we mean by integrals and conditions. So if a person is going to pray, they need to make sure that they have satisfied the conditions for the validity of the prayer. And within the prayer itself, they need to make sure that they satisfy the integrals. And so this shows us the importance of learning, the importance of acquiring the knowledge. Because if you're completely ignorant, or if you didn't study, for example, the basic, how to make the prayer valid in the Shafi'i school, or the Maliki school, or the Hanbali school, or the Hanafi school, in any school of Islamic law, then how can you be sure that you're doing the prayer according to what the Prophet ﷺ conveyed? Because we have to follow the Prophet ﷺ. So if a person is going into the prayer without learning that, for sure they can't be sure that they're doing it correctly, and it's not valid for them to say, well, hopefully it'll be accepted, hopefully it'll be right. And the reason that that's invalid, and because religiously that we have evidence for that from the own actions of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is a proof that the Shafi'is, that they mention a lot, and it's known as the hadith of the man who has an invalid prayer. Hadith al-Musi'i salatahu, the hadith of the one who invalidated his prayer, or the one with the invalid prayer. So this is referring to a man that came and prayed, and the Prophet ﷺ noticed and observed this person praying. And when he finished supposedly praying, he went to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, he initiated. It wasn't that the man came and said, O Messenger of Allah, was my prayer valid? No, the Prophet ﷺ initiated and said, Irji' فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَلِّ. He said, go back because you didn't pray. And what does that mean? Did the Prophet ﷺ say, no, hopefully his intention, and he had a good intention, and hopefully it'll be accepted? Did the Prophet ﷺ say, oh, I don't want to break his heart or anything like that? No, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, go back because you haven't prayed. Yani, someone who they want to pray, they want to have this obligation lifted from them, they would welcome someone bringing it to their attention that they didn't do it right, so that they can make sure that they do it right. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told them that, Irji' فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَلِّ, Irji' فَصَلِّ فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَلِّ. And so the man went back and he did whatever again, and he came back again, and the Prophet ﷺ told him that again. He said, Irji' فَصَلِّ فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَلِّ. He said, go back and pray because you didn't pray. So the man went back a second time. And then it happened again, and then the third time. And then the third time the Prophet ﷺ, he told the companions, he said, عَلِّمُوا صَاحِبَكُمْ. He said, teach your companion, and teach your friend how to do the prayer right. Because the third time the man came back and he said, the Prophet ﷺ, he told him, go back and pray. He didn't pray. The man said, I don't know how to do it any other way. The man told the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to do it any other way. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he told the companions to teach that man. So we take this from the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, that if we witness somebody doing something invalid, we advise them. We do it. Why? Is it so that we can satisfy something within ourselves? No, it's so that we can help the person. It's so to help the person, simply to help the person. Think about how meticulous people are with things of the dunya. You can't just go for something serious like papers or some sort of documentation for the government. You can't just scrabble on the application and say, oh, I hope they take it, I hope they accept it, I hope everything goes well. No, because what's going to happen is you're not going to get what it is that you're trying to get, and there will be penalties. There will be penalties. Think about how meticulous people are with things that have to do with basic livelihood things. The person, for example, if they want to buy a product, if they want to buy some product for their comfort or whatever, they're not just going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to just randomly scroll and whatever my finger lands on, and that's the product I'm going to order. No, you see these people going, they look up the product, they look at the reviews, they might even watch a video of it, they might ask their friends about it. Is this, should I buy this, should I not buy it? They don't just throw caution to the wind and just buy whatever. Then the people that are considered to be, and it would be considered to be foolish to do otherwise. And if that's the case with something related to the dunya, like dunya matters, like dunya possessions, so then how about with whether or not your prayer was valid? The first thing that the Muslim is judged on Judgment Day is for his prayer. That's the first thing that he's called to account for, is for his prayer. So, and the prayer is the greatest good deed after being Muslim. So after having the correct belief in Allah and His Messenger, the prayer is the greatest good deed. You're going to come on Judgment Day and hope that your prayers were done correctly. And another point is the difference between valid and rewardable. So if a person, they do an act of worship in the valid way, now they've done the act of worship, they've done the thing that they were obligated to do, and it's no longer a debt on their soul. So when a person, they for example do the Lucid prayer, if they did it in the minimum valid way, then it's written that they fulfilled the order. This is no longer a debt on their soul. On Judgment Day, they won't be asked, why didn't you pray? Because no, they fulfilled the prayer. Now, in order for them to get reward, now you have these other aspects that's beyond validity that would increase the level of reward that you would get. Like for example, if you had the khushu' the entire time that you were in the prayer, your prayer would be highly rewardable. If you, for example, you dressed in a certain way for the prayer, like you dressed in a thobe and you had, for example, a shawl on top, and you put the turban on, for example, and you perfumed yourself, and you use siwak, all these things add to the reward of the prayer. So there's a difference between the level of reward that you get and the actual validity of the prayer. So it's possible that someone would have a valid prayer, the prayer would be valid, but they don't get any reward. It's possible. There are scenarios like that. So we're talking right now about validity. Because with validity, at least you won't be judged for not doing it. It'll be counted that you did it, but of course, if you missed out on the reward, you missed out on the most reward that you would be able to get throughout your day besides being Muslim. Continuing on, now page 58, the first bold after under the line. I realize that some of your copies might be a different edition, but in my copy it's page 58, the first bold after the line. And there's a line separating the text. In the integrated text, the first bold. The author said, also, one must avoid doing their invalidators. You have to avoid doing the things that invalidate the acts of worship. If someone accountable knows of another person leaving out any of these obligations or performing them incorrectly in such a way that the obligation will not be fulfilled if one carries on, they must order the wrongdoer to perform these obligations in the manner that will make it valid. So we are obligated to advise people that we know for sure that they did an act of worship incorrectly. Now, obviously, this is a very touchy and sensitive topic for many people, especially nowadays. People that their hearts are so spoiled and so, or they show the apparent signs of arrogance. And when you go and tell them or advise them, they say, who are you to tell me, or you can't tell me, and they say things like, only God can judge me. Well, it's true that Allah Ta'ala is the only one who will judge the people on Judgment Day. But that's, to say that is not the same as trying to say that if you do a sin in front of my face, that I can't tell you anything. Of course I can, because it's simple. Like if somebody's walking and they're not watching where they're going, and there's let's say a big hole in front of them, and if you don't say anything to them, they're gonna fall right into that hole. Are you gonna let the person like, well, it's none of my business, it's their life, and let them fall into the hole? No, you don't do that to someone that you care about, and you try to protect those that you care about. So for the Muslims, as for us, for the Muslims, when we advise other Muslims, if they do a sin in front of us or if they do something wrong in front of us, it's from a place of love. It's from a place of caring or wanting what's good for that person. It's not from a place of I'm putting you down. It's not from a place of me kicking you when you're down. It's not from a place of me wanting to degrade you. It's not from a place of me wanting to point out your flaws. But everybody who has a true bond of friendship with a Muslim or with another person, they know that this is part of what comes with being a true friend or being someone that truly cares about someone. That you tell them what's best for them, even if that's not what they want to hear. The one who, for example, enables you and is like a yes person and they agree with everything, and they don't steer you the right way, and they see you, for example, activity, and they just go along and keep on pushing you. This is a bad person. This is not a person that wants your goodness. This is not a person that cares about you. This is not a person that cares about your well-being. So for us, and so the religious judgment is we're obligated if we see something that's explicitly haram, not like something that there's a difference of opinion, and for example, if a person, their preference is the ideal, the other person would tell them not to do it because it's better if they didn't do it. Here we're talking about something that's explicitly haram. Like for example, like not fasting during Ramadan, like not praying the 5 obligatory prayers, like not wearing the hijab, So this is something that each person they approach it in the wise way. But as far as the religious judgment, we have to order the wrongdoer to perform the obligations in the manner that will make it valid. And it is obligatory upon the accountable person, if they see an individual performing their duties incorrectly, to force them to do so. Now, forcing them to do so, this is within the context of having that authority. So sometimes you don't have that authority. Oftentimes you don't have that authority. Oftentimes you're not able to force someone to do what's right. But sometimes you are. In those scenarios where you are, then that's what you have to do. And for example, like if it's your house, and someone, for example, brought beer into the house and they want to drink beer into the house. You can force them not to drink it. You can say, I don't want this in my house. And if they don't want to get rid of it, then they can't stay drinking the beer in your house. And nobody can say anything against you for that because it's your house. So there you can enforce that. You can enforce that because it's your house. And in other certain scenarios. But for the majority of the case, you can't enforce. So for example, you can't go, for example, to the liquor store that's on the corner store or whatever, or the convenience store. You can't go and take all the bottles of alcohol and spill them out because you don't have the authority to do that. Because of the circumstances of where we're living. You don't have the authority to do that. You don't have the ability. You don't have the ability to physically do that. Because what's going to result from it is something that is a greater harm. And the rule that the scholars mentioned is that whenever there is something that is haram or prohibited being done in the open, and if you were to forbid it, or if you were to oppose it or go against it or try to change it or try to stop it, if as a result of you attempting to stop that prohibited thing, a greater harm occurs, then it's sinful for you to try to stop it. So keep that in mind. I.e., to impose on them the performance of the obligations correctly if one is able to compel and order the wrongdoer. Nowadays, there is that culture or concept of let everybody do what they want and you can't tell somebody else what to do and this and that. But that's against this basic religious judgment that we're talking about. So within the confines of Islam, if they do something haram, you have to, for example, order them to do what's right. You have to tell them, for example, don't do this. If you can't physically stop them, then you have to tell them stop with your tongue. And after that, if they don't listen, then it's not on you because they're doing that and you can't do anything to physically stop them. However, you have to be against that in your heart. You have to oppose that in your heart. You have to reject that in your heart. Otherwise, one must denounce that wrongdoing in one's heart when unable to force or order its change. For this condemnation in the heart is the weakest degree of faith, i.e., the least that is required if unable to enact a change by physical or verbal means. And this is taken from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. مَنْ يَرَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us that if you see a munkar, see and know about it. Not that you're assuming, not that you're spying on people, not that you're prying into people's personal lives and trying to uncover and unconceal what they're hiding. No, they're doing it in front of your face. They have no shame. They're doing it in front of your face. They don't fear Allah. They're doing it in front of your face. They have succumbed to, and it's become easy for them to commit a sin out in the open. So either you can stop them physically, and if not, then you verbally try to stop it, and if not, then you oppose it and reject it in your heart. You condemn it in your heart. And this is the part that many people we see nowadays, they're not even doing that. They're celebrating the person for doing haram. They're encouraging the person to do haram. They're pushing the person to do haram. They're giving them likes for posting the haram things that they're doing. Subhanallah. It is obligatory upon the accountable person to leave out all the prohibited matters, both small and enormous, forbid whoever commits them, and to forcefully prevent the wrongdoer by physical or verbal measures from committing them if able, provided that censuring the wrongdoer does not result in a graver sin than the original. And we already mentioned that. Or else, if unable to eliminate it, one must reject those prohibited actions in one's heart. And we already mentioned that. The definition of unlawful haram is what Allah threatened its perpetrator with punishment, that is, the misdeed which makes its committer deserving of punishment in the hereafter. That's the definition of haram. The definition of haram is prohibited. It means something that the person that does it, Allah Ta'ala threatened the one who does that with punishment. Therefore, they would be deserving of punishment. Now, nobody should get confused and think that just by committing a sin, that means that automatically for sure that you're going to get punished. Now, so let's separate the two things, because in Islam we know that if the person sins, the gateway or the opportunity to rectify and to eliminate and to erase that sin and to repent from that sin is vast. It's very wide open, because Allah Ta'ala is Al-Ghafur Ar-Rahim. However, that person is deserving, and in that state that he is in, and before repentance, if a person commits a sin, from the time that they commit it until the time that they repent, that whole time, they're deserving of God's punishment, because they disobeyed Allah. They violated. They were not entitled to do that. They had no authority to do that. Subhanallah. And you see how backwards these cultural Marxists are these days. Nowadays, it's not even about doing injustice to someone. It's if you yourself, you have principles and you have boundaries, and your boundaries don't include them, right? Your boundaries don't include them. Your boundaries are simply saying, for me, I don't condone that. I'm not down with that. I don't like that. I don't want that. Within my boundaries, I reject this. Just for that, they come at you like a criminal. They come at you like you committed an injustice and a crime. They come at you like you murdered somebody. Subhanallah. To them, if you do that, then you're deserving of being supposedly cancelled. Na'udhu billah. And what they mean by that is for people to be negative towards you, for people to bombard you with toxicity and negativity, just because, for example, within your boundaries and within your principles, you don't include something that they like or that they want. Subhanallah. And so, but then they turn around and they want to say things like, oh, well, how can you say that God's going to punish this person? How can you say that this person deserves punishment? That's the case. They violate him. And in the case where they want to cancel someone and bombard them with their negativity and toxicity, it's not even a violation. If I set up a boundary that doesn't include you, I'm not doing injustice to you. I'm not taking your property. I'm not disgracing your name. I'm not insulting your mother. I'm not insulting your father. I'm just saying, for me, my boundary, I don't want that. I don't like that. This is not me. I don't do that. Respect my boundary. I exclude certain things. That's not a violation. But to them, because they get personally offended and because they're driven by their emotions, they consider it the biggest violation. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And so the definition of unlawful is the misdeed which makes its committer deserving of punishment in the hereafter, and promised its avoider in obedience to the order of Allah with reward. So when we say that Allah Ta'ala, He made something haram, this means that if a person does it, they deserve the punishment. If a person does it, they deserve the punishment. And if they leave it out with the intention of obeying Allah, they leave it out with the intention of obeying Allah, not because they didn't want to be scandalized, not because they didn't want people to look at them a certain way. They left out the haram thing because they wanted to obey Allah, and they get reward. Allah Ta'ala promised them reward. And Allah Ta'ala, He is the creator of everything. He is the true owner of everything. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us, كَانَ اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْءٌ غَيْرُهُ, which means that Allah Ta'ala exists eternally without a beginning, and everything else exists with a beginning. So, everything in this universe is a creation of Allah. It is other than Allah. So that includes what? That includes time, that includes space, that includes directions, that includes images, that includes shapes, that includes volumes, that includes colors, that includes emotions, that includes organs, and that includes the arsh, the throne. Allah Ta'ala is the creator of the throne. Just like Allah Ta'ala is the creator of everything else. Everything in this universe is created by Allah. And the Muslims, every single Muslim says that Allah Ta'ala is not attributed with change. Allah Ta'ala is not attributed with change, because change means creation. Change means being a creation. So therefore, before Allah Ta'ala created the throne, He existed without it, and after He created it, His existence didn't change. So why are there people that claim to be Muslim, and yet they want to say that Allah Ta'ala is physically above the throne, when it is a fact of the matter that no one can deny that Allah is the only one without a beginning, and everything else has a beginning, including the arsh. So these people that say that Allah is physically above the throne, they're claiming that after Allah created the throne, after existing without the throne, that His existence changed and He became physically above the throne. And this is blasphemy. And also the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَأَنْتَ الْبَاطِنُ فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ, saying, oh Allah, you are al-batin, and there is nothing under you. So how could they say that Allah is physically above the throne when the Prophet ﷺ said, oh Allah, there's nothing under you? Truly, this shows that they do not follow the Prophet ﷺ, and they do not follow Islam. As for the definition of obligatory, wajib is its opposite, the opposite of the prohibition. That is what Allah promised its doer with the purpose of following the order of Allah with reward, and threatened its neglector with punishment. So the thing that is considered to be obligatory, wajib, is something that Allah Ta'ala guaranteed and promised that the one who does it with the intention of obeying Allah, he has promised reward. And the one who neglects it, the one who doesn't do it, the one who doesn't fulfill it, the one who falls short in it, he is threatened with punishment. So you see that it's the opposite of the definition of the prohibition. The prohibition is if somebody does it, Allah threatens that person with punishment. And He promises the one who leaves it out with the intention of obedience with reward. And the obligation is the thing that Allah promised the one who does it with the intention of obedience with reward, and He threatened the one who leaves it out with punishment. And by that we conclude the first section of the essentials of belief. Now we're going to start the new section of purification and prayer according to the school of Imam Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions about what we mentioned? No. So the question is, for those of you that couldn't hear, is if you encounter a person for the first time, you don't know them, and they say, or they do something that's haram in front of you, and you don't know if they'll accept from you or not. You don't know if you tell them, for example, this is haram, they'll do it. You don't know if they're going to accept what you say or not. Do you still have to order them to do it, or do you still have to forbid the ummah? So the answer is that some scholars said if you have the confident assumption, if you don't believe that they'll accept, then you don't have to. And some said that you have to because you don't have any indication that they'll accept or not. SubhanAllah, you never dealt with them before. You don't know them. They don't know you. You don't know how they'll react. So at least it's 50-50. At least. So one side is not heavier than the other. It's even. So الآن لا استحضر اسما لكن هكذا ينقلون عن الشيء. يقولون إن ظن أنه لا يستمع إليه، لا يستمع إلى نصيحته، لا يجب. هو هكذا نقل عن الشيخ، لكن من أين قاله هو لا أدري، لكن هو ينسب إلى الشيخ. So basically, if you never had experience, go ahead.
Let's see. It's 50-50 chance. The guy did something haram, and you tell him it's haram, you react bad, blaspheme.
Then you just leave him alone.
But he blasphemes, is it on you?
No, it's not on you because you didn't know. Yeah. So the question is, now let's say in the case of the 50-50, you never encountered this person before, and you see that they did something that is explicitly incorrect, right? Not that there's room for it to be correct. It's something explicitly incorrect. And you correct your intention and you approach the person and you say something to them, and they turn out to react in an extreme way. They flip out and they commit blasphemy, for example, and they say something blasphemous to you. That none of that consequence would be on you because obviously you never dealt with the person before and you didn't expect that they would react to it. So
at that point you have to talk to blaspheme.
And if you feel like they're going to listen, then you tell them. Otherwise
You already didn't listen.
so don't tell them anything. Yeah, leave them how they are. And without accepting their situation, but after that reaction, then the assumption is if you tell them this is blasphemy, then they're going to say more blasphemy.
Very blaspheme. Go on thinking you did.
That might be true, but looking at the fact that the thing that caused it in the first place was you just saying, for example, you missed this integral in the prayer, your prayer is not valid. And because of that, they went beyond the bounds and they blasphemed. Then imagine if you told them that they blasphemed, they might blaspheme even more. Some people, they're like that because their anger drives them. They would say something even more. Now, so moving on to purification and prayer, page 60. Purification and prayers. After the author concluded discussing the issues of belief, he started with the rules of purification, which is what makes prayer permissible, such as wudu and ghusl, and that which is similar in appearance. So that's the definition of purification. And one of the definitions. that which makes prayer permissible, like wudu and ghusl, and that which is similar in appearance. Because there's certain things that are similar in appearance to wudu and ghusl that are not actually like wudu and ghusl, but they're counted as purification. He also started explaining the rules of prayer, which is a set of sayings and actions initiated by saying Allahu Akbar and terminated by saying Assalamu Alaikum. So these are definitions, and remember that every Saturday we have like a recap and we ask questions. So keep in mind, one of the questions I might ask is, what is the definition of prayer? Or in this case, as-salah. When we talk about in the context of Islamic law, we say as-salah, and what are we referring to? We're referring to a set of sayings and actions initiated by saying Allahu Akbar and terminated by saying Assalamu Alaikum. That's the definition of prayer. So if somebody were to ask you, what is the prayer? What is the definition of prayer? You say that. A set of sayings and actions initiated by saying Allahu Akbar and terminated by saying Assalamu Alaikum. Because this perfectly defines what the prayer is. Section 5. Clarifying the times of the 5 prayers and what pertains to them. Among the obligations upon every accountable person are 5 prayers to be performed throughout the day and the night. We know from this that a person is not sinful if they were to leave out praying the witr or rawatib prayers. So, like we said, this fiqh, this jurisprudence that we follow or that we're covering right now, is in the school of Al-Imam Shafi'i. And in the school of Al-Imam Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu, both terms, fard and wajib, they mean the same thing, except in certain cases when we're talking about the hajj. But in the prayer and the fasting and in the zakah, when we say fard or wajib, they mean the same exact thing. Now keep in mind that some other scholars, like Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he has a distinction between fard and wajib. He has a distinction between fard and wajib. So even Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he says there's 5 fard prayers. Because all the scholars agree that there's only 5 fard prayers. Meaning that there's only 5 prayers that are fard. Meaning, in this case, obligation. Meaning, in this case, that these are the only prayers that are fard. That they call them fard, the ultimate obligation. In the Hanafi school, however, they have something that is below fard that they call wajib. What they call wajib, they judge it that if you leave it out, you're sinful. Okay? In the Hanafi school, they judge the wajib. If you leave it out, you're sinful. And in the Hanafi school, for example, the witr prayer is wajib. In the Hanafi school, the witr prayer is wajib. So, according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, the witr prayer is not from the 5 fard prayers, but if you leave out the witr prayer, you're sinful. In the Shafi'i school, this is not the case. In the Shafi'i school, he judges if you leave out the witr prayer and if you leave out the rawatib, which are the prayers that are directly associated to the 5 daily prayers, you are not sinful. Okay? You are not sinful. So this is the judgment according to Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, and which is the one that we're explaining this material. But just keep in mind that the Hanafi school, they consider the witr prayer wajib. So if you want to do what's best, if you want to exit from the difference of opinion, what's best is to pray the witr every single night. Every single night. And then we'll talk about that, inshallah, in more detail in classes. Since knowing the times of these prayers is obligatory upon every accountable person, the author started to clarify these times. The first prayer is the early afternoon prayer, al-dhuhr. Its time begins when the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky and remains until the shadow of an object becomes equal to the length of the object itself, in addition to its zenithal shadow. That is, for the shadow of the object to extend past the object by the length of the shadow when the sun was at its zenith, if any. Hence, when the object casts a shadow as long as the object itself, plus the length of the zenithal shadow, the time of Dhuhr has ended and the time of Asr has started. The zenithal shadow is the shadow when the sun is in the middle of the sky. So, this is, in order to understand this properly, there's a few things to know. First, the fact that the sun rises from the east and it sets in the west. When the sun starts to rise from the east, it goes up and up and up and up until it gets to a point where it's in the middle of the sky. When it's at its highest point, this is called the zenith. When the sun is at its zenith, there's a certain shadow that objects cast. So even if you were to take a pen and you were to, stick it in the ground, or if you're looking at, let's say, a stop sign, or if you're looking at, let's say, a cone in the street, or any object that's erect. When the sun is at its zenith, usually the case is that there's a little tiny shadow that object is giving off. This is called the zenith shadow. That zenith shadow is a certain size. So when does Dhuhr start? It starts when the sun starts to go west. So after it's at the zenith, then it starts to go down. That's when Dhuhr begins. And Dhuhr ends when the length of the shadow of an object, any object per se, it gets to be as long as the object itself plus the zenith shadow. Because you have to take the zenith shadow into account because it was already there when the sun was in the middle of the sky. So basically what happens is when the sun starts to move towards the west, the shadow starts to get longer. So that zenith shadow would begin to grow. So that's how, for example, that's one way for us to know that the Dhuhr is in. That exactly, accurately. Because we look at the object, we see the shadow stop shrinking, it's at its zenith. And then we see the shadow starting to get bigger. Now, we know that the Dhuhr is in. So we have exact, accurate time. So that when we see the shadow grow, we check our watch and we write down the time. We document the time. So then the next day we know that, for example, that time or a minute after that time, Dhuhr is in for sure, and so on and so forth. And this is how the Muslim, he determines the beginning of the prayer times. Not just solely relying on calendars. It's important to shed light on this issue because many people, they just do things without learning, without knowing the rules. They hear, for example, they have an app, and then all of a sudden they hear the app calling the adhan. Immediately, for example, they'll get up and start praying without verifying. So that's invalid. It is invalid to rely solely on an app calling an adhan or on a printed calendar. Except in both cases, in the case of the app and in the case of the calendar, the exception is if you know the person who came up with those figures, who came up with those times, and you know that this person knows and that they wrote those times down based on knowing that the time is in. And the only way that you know the time is in is, for example, through observation or through a deduction, and through a valid estimation. So if the person that made the calendar, you know that they're trustworthy and that they know how to tell when the prayer time is in, and that they relied on their documentation, on their observation, for example, then you can go by that time in the calendar because you know that the person, they put that time because on that day, they observed the time and this is the time that they document. Same thing with the app. If you know that the person who made those figures on the app, who put those numbers there, that person, they went by their observation or by any other valid Islamic method, then you can go by that. But if you don't, then you can't rely solely on it. You can use it as a tool. So for example, when the app starts to call the adhan, then you go and you check and you verify for yourself, then you can do that. this is something that is valid. This is something that's okay. But just to, for example, you go look at the calendar and it says, for example, 1:27 for Dhuhr, and then automatically start to pray. No, it doesn't work like that. If you look at the calendar, then you go and try to verify that yourself, or you wait until you're sure that, for example, it's in. But to rely solely on the calendar or on the app, then you can't do that. Now in the case of a Muslim country where they have the adhan in the mosque, a live adhan, a mu'adhin, and that they still have that, calling the adhan, then for example, if you know that mu'adhin is trustworthy and they know how to observe and they're calling the adhan based on their observation or any other valid Islamic method, just by hearing his voice, you can judge that the prayer is in. That's the case with the live adhan, and that does not apply to the recording. It does not apply to the recording of an adhan being played on the masjid loudspeaker and resonating through the city. That does not apply. What applies in the case of the adhan from a mosque is if it's the person calling the adhan themselves, a live adhan, and that person is trustworthy and they know the ways to determine the beginning of the prayer time. Same thing goes for a radio station. If you're in a Muslim country, you're playing the radio, they usually play a recorded adhan over the radio. Same thing, you can't only rely on that. If they call the adhan on the radio, then you go and verify, and you verify that, for example, Maghrib is in, khalas, then you judge that Maghrib is in. But just by hearing the voice, some people, subhanAllah, you would see them. It's like people in a race where they have those lights. They have the red and then the yellow and then the green for go. It's like they're sitting there, sitting at the table with their fork in their hand, the plate of food in front of them, waiting for the person on the radio to say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Immediately, just before the person finishes saying Allah, they're stuffing their mouth. Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Na'udhu Billah. The zenith or shadow is the shadow when the sun is in the middle of the sky. And we already explained that. The second prayer is the late afternoon prayer, al-asr. Its time begins when the time of dhuhr ends without an interval between them and remains until the whole disk of the sun sets. The third prayer is the sunset prayer, al-maghrib. Its time begins after the setting of the sun and remains until the disappearance of the reddish twilight, which is a redness that appears after sunset in the western horizon. Now for Maghrib, how do you know when Maghrib is in? The whole entire disk of the sun has to completely set in the western horizon. So if you have a vantage point where you can see the western horizon, you're looking at the sun going down, and mashallah, it is a beautiful phenomenon, it is a beautiful thing to witness. You see the sun slowly going down and going down and going down and going down until suddenly it's disappeared, it's gone. Now, since you saw that, now you know for sure Maghrib is in. You check your watch, you can even get the accuracy down to the millisecond depending on the watch that you have. You usually get it down to the second, and for accuracy. And if you want, you could just like add 15 seconds just to give you a cushion. But if you don't have a vantage point to the western horizon, then what do? How do you determine, like, for example, there's buildings in the way, or there's mountains in the way. So how do you know that Maghrib is in if you can't see the sun dipping down below the western horizon? Then you look at the eastern horizon, and when you see the darkness approaching from the east, now you know that Maghrib is in. So this is how you determine that Maghrib is in for sure. This is important for the person to be knowledgeable about that, because during Ramadan, obviously you're hungry, your nafs wants you to eat, and you want to eat, you've been fasting all day, but you can't go ahead of the time and eat without it being Maghrib, subhanAllah. And the time of Maghrib, it lasts until the redness disappears in the western horizon. So when you look at the western horizon, the sun goes down, there's a layer of redness. And then above that layer, there's a layer of white, and then above that layer, there's the black. So in the Shafi'i school, the redness, once that disappears, once that layer goes down, Maghrib is over. So in the Shafi'i school, the Maghrib prayer is relatively short. The fourth prayer, and in the Hanafi school, they don't consider that Maghrib is over until the whiteness completely disappears. The fourth prayer is the nightfall prayer, Al-Isha. Its time begins when the Maghrib time ends and remains until the appearance of the true dawn, which is a horizontal illumination that appears thin in the eastern horizon, then expands and spreads gradually. By saying true dawn, it is known that the false dawn is eliminated from being considered as an indication that the nightfall prayer time has ended. So the night prayer, the Isha, when does it end? When the true dawn appears. What is the true dawn? It is a thin white light that appears horizontally, and it starts to get thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker until the sun comes out. The dawn prayer, the fifth prayer, is the dawn prayer, as-subuh. Its time begins when the Isha time ends and remains until the appearance of the first part of the sun. So for Maghrib, it starts when the whole entire disk of the sun sets. For Subuh, it ends when just even the little piece of the sun peaks over the horizon. Once that little piece of the sun peaks over the horizon, Subuh is over. This is called Ash-Shuruq. And we'll stop here. Are there any questions about what we mentioned? You can ask questions through here, through the app. You just hit the little question bubble and you ask your question. Now it's important to mention that this Sunday is the 29th of Dhul Hijjah, which is the last lunar month. And so that means that either Monday, August 9th, or Tuesday, August 10th, is the first Hijri, is the first day of the Hijri year. So we advise all our pubescent male Muslims to go out and check for the Hilal to determine the beginning of the first month, Al-Muharram. And also, there's going to be a special event tomorrow night here in Musalla. We're going to be commemorating and remembering the important lessons that the migration from Mecca to Medina, that the migration teaches us. And this is an important event and it is a great event. And the Muslims are, it is such a great event that the Muslims, they set it as their way of keeping count of the years. And we have one question here. It says, if a person starts to pray according to the Hanafi school, would they be obligated to go back and make a witr? I will ask that because I don't have that much knowledge in the Hanafi school with regarding to those details. I'll ask some of my colleagues about that and I'll get back to you inshallah. Are there any other questions? طيب بارك الله فيكم. نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ربي اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم.